It's hard to break through the noise on various social media things and mix that in with the fact that sometimes just for our own personal sanity, a lot of us are being like, I don't want to have anything to do with social media. I got to log off this stuff. And so it is a conundrum of how do I reach everybody?
Welcome to Who's This For, a podcast about creating with intention. I talk with artists, entrepreneurs, and media makers about connecting with their audience by focusing on a single person. You create music, brands, experiences, or stories. This is the podcast for you. Hey, thanks for joining us on Who Is This For, the podcast that talks about speaking with intention to an audience of one. I mean you, the listener, right there. And I brought a great guest today to talk about this, and it's going to be sort of an interesting discussion. This podcast tends to get a little meta anyway, but we're going to get pretty meta because we're going to talk about communication and politics, hopefully without talking about the politics. I mean, maybe a little politics, but not the pitchfork politics, as it were, the nerdy communication politics, hopefully. And so I have brought a great friend and great communicator and just wonderful person, Representative Jodi Emerson. How's it going today, Jodi?
It's good. Thanks for having me, Scott. Appreciate it.
Just to get the listeners a little background, give us the quick CV or how you got into politics, what you've been doing, a little bit of that.
I jokingly say I must have hit my head, passed out, and I woke up and somehow I was running for office because why would any sane person do this? But for me, being in this office is just an extension of a lot of community service that I've done and that my family's been really involved in. When my kids were little, I was that very involved mom that was the PTA mom, the Girl Scout leader, the soccer manager, that whatever they were doing, I was involved in. If you ask my daughters, they would say I was the overly involved parent. And then they did this really rude thing and decided to grow up and go off to college. And I was like, what am I going to do with my time now? I can't just spend it talking to my husband. He's going to drive me crazy. And that's for those of you who know my husband, know how true that is. I got involved in an organization that did some awareness and public outreach about human trafficking. And because of that, I started to get a little bit involved in politics because we needed to update some of the laws that we had in Wisconsin. We really hadn't updated those laws to be with the digital age. And so had some real good successes updating laws. I was on the Attorney General Task Force for Human Trafficking, really involved in a lot of policy issues. Sorry, my cat is deciding to join the podcast now. For those of you who are watching via video, it's going to be interesting. Sorry about this.
Oh, no need to be sorry, but they are going to be left in.
Oh, absolutely. That's totally fine. But if for those who are just listening, if you're wondering why I get distracted, it's because all of a sudden there's a cat in my face. So then when the position opened up, Dana Walks had it before I did. And when he decided to run for governor, they'll open the position up. And I thought, heck, I'm in Madison every other week anyways, having some successes around some issues, and decided to throw my hat in the ring. Literally 2 years before, I had a loving Facebook spat with a very good friend of mine. He's, yeah, you're going to ask us for our vote to some random Tuesday coming up soon. And I was like, no, I'm not. I am not that crazy. Who wants to get involved in politics? But for me, doing this job is really just an extension of helping my community, doing things that I have with the neighborhood association and other pieces like that. And that's how I look at it. This was never on my bucket list of anything to do. But for me, being part of a community is about serving them one way or the other. And this is a way that I can serve. And I'm really, I love this job. It's definitely had its ups and downs, especially recently with, all the things that are going on in politics. What happened across the border in Minnesota really puts a spotlight on what you're doing and why you're doing it.
It's a very interesting time to be communicating to the public. I see there being I suppose there's internal and external communications anywhere, but it feels like there's sort of a dual version of that because you have internal and external both in the politics game,
Yeah.
but also across those party lines. Is that kind of what you're seeing? Is you have almost like four different quadrants?
Yeah, absolutely. And in recently too, Wisconsin's legislative maps changed. And I used to have just the city of Eau Claire, which I think is a lot easier to communicate when you've got one political subdivision. I can,
Right.
respond to, oh, what maybe like the city council is doing or some fun little story that happened in the news about Eau Claire. Well, now I have a part of Eau Claire, Altoona, Fall Creek, Augusta, Fairchild, Cadott, and all the townships in between. I
That's
went
a
from
lot of
having
different
one,
people.
it is. I went from having one school district to all are part of 8 school districts. Here comes the cat again into the shot. Good Lord. And so it's getting to know a lot of new stakeholders, whether it's with the school districts, the village boards, the town boards, and knowing what's going on. And I think one of the things that we've lost a lot in society today, and now I'm going to sound like a, great grandpa sitting on my front porch in my rocking chair, but is the face-to-face communication, which is really hard when I've got a spread out district like I do. I can have face-to-face communication a lot easier in Eau Claire and Altoona, which is really close to where I live, versus going to Cadott, which is, depending on which route you're taking, 45 to 50 minutes away from my house. So it's a lot easier to be physically present in some districts. Um, you add that into the fact that as soon as you put an R or a D next to your name, people just assume certain things about you. And so being able to have those face to face communications when probably 40% of the population doesn't want to have something to do with you, regardless of what that initial is, because we're so entrenched right now, really gets hard. And then the fact that my job is physically in Madison. And so I spend this time of year a lot of the week down in Madison. And so it's hard to have that face to face communication. It's hard to break through the noise on various social media things and mix that in with the fact that sometimes, just for our own personal sanity, a lot of us are being like, I don't want to have anything to do with social media. I got to log off this stuff. And so it is a conundrum of how do I reach everybody so they get to know me and know what I stand for, and I get to know them so I can fight for what they need in different parts of those districts. Because as we are all the same and similar, there are very unique things that Fall Creek needs right now, or Fairchild needs right now, or Cadott needs right now, that I don't have the historical context of because I haven't represented them as long as I've represented Eau Claire.
You're also a conduit the other way because you're bringing these needs of Fall Creek, Cadott, and Eau Claire to a totally different area of Madison. I don't think this is too political, but to say, but Wisconsin's geographic center is not in the region that we're in. It's not in Western Wisconsin, no matter how much we think it is. I have definitely grown up here and thought it was the center of it all my entire life.
It is the center of the universe. What are you talking about, Scott?
Well, no, that's the right answer. But no, from traveling the state, learned like we're one piece of the puzzle. And so you're bringing all these separate puzzle pieces that you're pushing together and then putting them in that mix. How does that work as you're communicating that both to the people in your party, like in Madison, but also across the aisle? Because you probably do have a lot of commonalities with those people with that R initial when you're talking about rural issues, I would think, at some level.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the piece where coming back down to being human versus representative this or representative or senator that, when we can come together, and this is just a core value of mine personally, but like when we can come together and agree on something, we start to break down barriers. And I think that is so important in our world today. You look at what happened, anything that happens in the national news,
Yeah.
and you can just about guarantee, certain people are going to say this in the comment section, the other people are going to react a different way. I don't know where we have lost the ability to look at something objectively and then go, huh, that was good, that was bad, or that was a little bit of both in there, and that critical thinking. And the more that we can be humans to each other and not just this person that I see on my little screen or my big screen or whatever, we can start to think about, oh, okay, I understand where that bill came from. I understand where that comment came from. And that's the hard thing about this job is everything is recorded. Everything is hyper analyzed.
Right.
Everything can be taken out of context. And I look at a set of ads that were run against me last year, um, where I was actually looking at my cell phone when I was sitting on the floor of the assembly. And our rules are we're not supposed to have our phones on the assembly, like any classroom. Of course, it
Yep.
happens. You just try and hide it like under your desk or
Yep.
something like
Duck it
that or
down a little
whatever.
bit.
So picture this. If you saw the ad, Scott, you know what I'm talking about. But somebody in front of me was given a really long speech. And so I started, checking emails and texts and stuff like that. And I'm a woman in my 50s. So I can't exactly read things real close up. I had to, like pull back a little bit, but then I can't have my phone up here because then I'm going to get busted for having my phone on the floor. So I put it under my desk and then I'm like leaning my head back so I could actually read it. And the set of ads came out that I was sleeping on the job.
Oof.
No, I wasn't. I was bored of my colleague's speech.
Right.
And I might have been trying to play solitaire or something like that, but I wasn't sleeping on the job. No, I'm kidding. Okay, my campaign team like turning over because I thought I was playing games, but I wasn't. I was checking emails and texts and things like that. But so it's how do we get past that point where somebody can look at that and go, oh, I know Jodi wouldn't be doing that. I know Jodi. Jodi's a good person. Yeah, I don't know.
It's a great lead into my next question. And this is almost a question I wasn't going to ask. But why are political speeches boring? I've stayed a pretty aware and active person throughout my life, but then I get to the actual like, oh, here's the government happening. I'm like, oh, it's kind of boring. Why is that?
Because it takes a while. It's not like an episode of Veep or something like that where everything gets wrapped up in an hour or something. We don't have the quality of writers that they do. We are the writers ourselves, so that might be it. We're just boring.
Oh,
But I think I've found too that, especially when we're looking at a floor session or things like that, we're all communicating to our constituents. And so just because everything has been said doesn't mean that everyone has said it. And people who are talking to their constituents in Madison and trying to get a clip for their news media or social media or whatever, maybe approach it a little differently than somebody who represents Superior or Appleton or something like that. And yeah, that's the phrase that I use a lot of times in this job too, is just because everything has been said doesn't mean everyone has said it.
right.
So maybe the boringness comes because we repeat ourselves an awful lot, but
Do you see a difference with the legislatures that they aren't in media markets and how they're talking? Because I know that like where I live, I will probably never see a quote from my state legislatures because I am firmly in the Twin Cities media market, etc. But do you see that difference between those legislatures that know that there isn't their media market as much?
yeah. And so I think about like what statewide media is looking at. First of all, over the last decade or two, we've seen an awfully large decrease in local media, whether it's something like an Eau Claire market or whether it's the smaller markets where we used to have weekly newspapers or your local radio station that would cover news. We're losing a lot of that now. And I think that is a problem when it comes to people being able to get their message out there. And so what happens is we have a couple of statewide news sources then that cover things, but to break through the noise of 132 elected officials in Madison, you've got to be pretty provocative, probably, to break through. Here's the clip that says it all, whatever. The clip that says it all does not is not the message that I need to get through to my folks in Altoona and Augusta and town of Seymour. I need to have a more middle of the road approach to reach those people where they're at. And so oftentimes those of us in the outlying areas of the state don't get the coverage from the state media that people in Madison do or Milwaukee do, because they can be provocative. They can say those things. If you're in a deep red district, if you're in a deep blue district, there's not a whole lot that can be said that's going to push your voters away. Those of us in very purple districts, we have to be very careful with how we are saying things. My values don't change because of the district that I had, but the way that I approach things, that does change a little bit. I think that's really important to speak in a way that your message can be heard. And I think that's kind of what this whole podcast is about. And so I'm so glad that you've had me on.
You're describing definitely what this podcast is about. So that's amazing. And yeah, I guess I've thought about, but like there is so much that you're measuring every moment, especially in a purple district, because you want to build consensus on some level. Even if you're not going to get their vote, you want them to know, like, hey, I'm literally doing a job for you. So that's huge. When you're picking like those statements that you're saying to the press, I suppose specifically, how much theater or whatever goes into those? I think a lot about those kind of things where I see someone that I'm like, hey, that person in government, I'd like to hear what they have to say because they do this, this, and this. And then the question comes up and they're like, oh, here's my answer that's on a script that I read, that I definitely wrote from wherever I'm coming from. So here we go. Oh, okay. Well, I'm the questioner. Here's the question. They're like, I'm going to return to the script now and ask it again. Is that something you all talk about in politics or like behind the scenes?
We will have some trainings as far as like how to approach different media things. How do you get your message out there? But honestly, more often than not, we're just trying to stay up on when's the next hearing, what bills do I need to read through these bills. I need to understand them so I can ask the questions about them. Shoot, I got to go down to Madison because we've got a floor session on Tuesday and I've got to do, I had company over the weekend and I've got to do laundry so I can pack up so I can head. Like, we're just people, and while some representatives have large staff, for the majority of us, we either have one full-time person, 1.5 full-time equivalent, or 2 people. So it's not like we've got this massive scrum of political hang our speeches and doing our things. And I need you to answer the phone, you to answer the emails, and I'll do the rest of it kind of thing. And when you are seeing what is coming out of, especially your state representatives, generally speaking, you are seeing us. We don't have this massive amount of staff and aides that everything gets filtered through. I personally have tried to take a step back from some social media posts and things like that. Like, I would love to be out there retweeting at these people who are spouting off nonsense and correcting people in the comments and things like that. But I don't think people do that from a place of maturity and reason more often than not. I think that's the race to get attention. And I think the race to get attention in more districts than not doesn't allow us to be servants of the people. It's all about, what does social media think of me? What does social media think of me? And so I just personally struggle. And maybe it's my age. I wasn't raised in, the social media world. Maybe it's just my age trying to be like, okay, yep, everything that happens, I also need to put out there on social media so people understand. But I'm trying to get past that and just be present in the district as much as I can, be at the local pancake feed, be at the local, summer festival so people know me and get to understand me. And that's when we have our best stuff that comes up. It's from having those one-on-one conversations with people. And they're like, hey, did you know that most of the UTVs that are being sold right now are over the weight limit for using on public trails. No, I had no idea a UTV user, but tell me more about that. And, that we work on passing a bill that ups the weight limit for it. That's good government.
Oh, yeah.
So
That's the
that doesn't
relevant
come from a good
things.
worded tweet. So
Someone who's kind of like gotten to play with it all since it started. It's changed, I think, in a lot of ways, because I feel like at first there was some ability to like argue in the comments, or at least like debate like logically, like, oh, okay, well, I see where you're coming from on this issue. There's some logic there, but like I have this other point that I think that we could also talk about. Like that kind of exchange used to happen a lot more. And this isn't going to be some like big question about when did social media become polarized, but I think that one thing for a lot of us anyway, and for me, I didn't realize when the time to stop engaging was for probably 2 years, where like probably 2016 through 2019, I kind of spun my wheels on like social media thinking I was still doing that. But yeah, I'm glad that you're very intentional about staying out of it right now. So that's good.
I'm trying to. I mean, I'm not always successful. I am a human. So occasionally I'll get it all worded in there and then I'll be like, oh, delete. Yeah, it is that piece, because that is also the public square that we have right now. And there is something to be said about exchanging ideas over that. You also don't know when you're talking to people on social media. Are they from your district? Are they from the state? Are they from the country? Are they a real person? Is this a bot? I think social media has really taught us in the last few years to be a little bit more discerning about what we're seeing. And the other thing too is people say things on social media that they would never say to somebody face to face either. And so we try and use social media to get out there to be like, I mean, ideally, I would say like, hey, come meet us. We're going to have this town hall about this issue or whatever. But then also in the context of what happened, recently in Minnesota with the assassination of people and the attempted assassination of others, for safety reasons, do you really want to have your public schedule out there much? Or do you want to just be popping up and being like, surprise, I'm at Bean and Bacon Days now?
I hadn't even thought about that as a communicating your calendar type piece.
A lot in a process right now of trying to figure out what needs to be out there, what doesn't need to be out there, what is taking care of yourself, what is living in fear, what is getting out and being among the people, what is doing too much in the publicity's sake. When I find that perfect medium for all of those, I'll probably just retire then because I'll be done. So,
wow. Or at least be able to advise others on this.
Maybe. There you go. Maybe I'll take it into a consulting realm and
I've heard about that
millions.
Once or twice. Well, okay, we're getting to the point of the interview where I'm going to ask you something. I'm going to ask you your dirty little secret. And that's, what are you using AI for these days?
So I'm the ranking Democrat on colleges and universities. That's one of the committees that I'm on. And we've started a couple of years ago, started looking at AI in the context of our students cheating. Now there is a big push from all kinds of industry. So whether it's the tech schools, the Polytechnic, or the four-year institutions, a lot of businesses want you to have AI experience. And so we need to get that set up. So it's not just about, Chat GPT punching out like a press release for us that I edit or something like that. It's about learning how to use AI. And I'll be honest, I think maybe part of it is my age or something. I don't know. I just really have not gotten into using AI that much. If I had a really great podcast that I could listen to on my 3-hour drive back and forth to Madison to Eau Claire, maybe I'd be an expert in 2 weeks on it. I don't know. But
one thing, and this is really interesting in the student front, though, because I've been reading a lot lately. There's a flip side to this issue, though, in the tech world. because they're already seeing junior developers and coders that came up using AI but didn't know how to code. And I mean, that's kind of the weird push-pull of it. It that I've seen is if you don't know the basics of what you're doing, then AI becomes like a little bit of a help, but also this sort of like risky business.
And I think that's where, like anything, we have to teach and learn the critical thinking process behind it. You need to know why. You need to know how. And then the mechanics are always changing of how we do something. But you need to understand why we're doing something, what the goal is, and go from there. But I mean, there's AI applications in the medical world, in the technology, in manufacturing, all kinds of things. But I think there are also people who are like, AI is going to destroy the world. Spell check didn't destroy the world, and certainly hasn't taught anybody how to spell. If you look at any comment section of any social media, but it is helpful to understand, oh, did I use the wrong to or there or whatever? But you still have to have the critical thinking skills to understand it. But yeah, we can't rely solely on AI for things, but we have to be able to use it as the tool to get us to something faster, sooner, and hopefully better than we would have been able to before.
Love it. Before we go, do you have anything you want to say to the good folks out there, be it constituents or, just that listener there in Tacoma who I don't know how they found us, but really glad they did.
Tacoma, that's amazing, Scott. When we look at communication, we all have a responsibility to vet what we are looking at. I look at our own, what we're ingesting as our own media ecosystem. And if you don't like what you're seeing, search out something different. If you don't like, if you see something, don't just believe that it's true. Vet it out a little bit. Do a simple Google search. We are responsible for what we are forwarding, nobody wants to be like great Uncle Ed who is emailing all these conspiracy theories to his entire, address book every Wednesday or something like that. We have a responsibility when it comes to communication, when it comes to information, to make sure we are doing the best that we can and get to know people. I think far too often, and this is something that was happening long before the COVID pandemic, but people are getting isolated and we're in our own little bubbles and we are not seeking out people who are different than us. And we need to do that. We need to get back to a time and a place where we're talking to people at the diner or the watering hole or at church or whatever it is, wherever you are gathering. Make sure that you are reaching out to people who maybe aren't somebody that you know already. That's what makes especially small town Wisconsin incredible. We love that we are not just surrounded by like people, but then also the flip side of it is, well, I need people like me. We need to be responsible for what we're doing, how we are saying things, and how we are reaching out to people. And I'm so glad to be on your podcast to talk about communication, because I think that is the key for everything. How we communicate is key and where we go from there. So thanks for doing what you're doing, Scott. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you, Jodi. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for serving our state. I appreciate that as well.
It has its days. Now I do love my job, so.
Yay. Well, it shows through. And I mean, everyone has its days with everything. So I just appreciate you doing what you're doing. So thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
And that's it for this episode of Who's This For? Remember, whether you're creating music, brands, experiences, or stories, it's all about focusing on that one person. I'm Scott Morfitt, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time on Who's This For?